Welcome to the ExFiles, a special edition podcast from full PreFrontal. We love stories because they take us to the secret hidden places where we store the essence of real living. Only through stories do we witness extraordinary moments of human resilience. In these special edition episodes, we hear the stories of former clients, learning about their gifts, challenges, aspirations, letdowns, and inner activism. The clients presented in the ExFiles have helped Sucheta become a better listener, observer, problem solver, and above all, a caring clinician. She hopes these stories will melt your heart and help you see executive function in a new light. And now, here is our host, Sucheta Kamath.
So I started my journey in this profession 20 years ago. I can believe it's been 20 years. And I did not start specifically with executive function as a center of my work, but I started something called neurogenic communication disorders. And I had my first job at Mass General Hospital in Boston. And there are many, many patients that I came across who really taught me what I know. And the having to work with them and having the challenge to help them has really made me the clinician that I am. And the reason this is really important for all of you to know is 20 years ago, we never called the challenges that clients were facing, if they were related to attention or memory or planning and organization and goal management, as executive dysfunction. We just didn't know what to call it. And we often, when clients came to see a speech and language pathologist, our focus used to be on their language skills and how do we help them using their language effectively, whether it's spoken language, written language. Also, we worked on cognition, which is thinking skills, and mostly focused on decision-making, critical reasoning. As I look back, that was a very fragmented approach if we only focused on a person's life from that peephole. So it's my honor and privilege to speak with one of my most favorite persons, and his name is Paul Hegarty, who came into my life as a clinician many, many years ago, and he's going to tell us his story very shortly. But he was one of those clients that really shaped the way I thought about cognitive rehabilitation and healing the whole of a person, what it takes to kind of get beyond the shaken sense of self, as one of the researchers' work I had read about. So here is Paul Hegarty, all the way from Boston. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Good morning, Sucheta. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Let me start with this a very general question. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up, and a little bit about your family?
Sure. I am the youngest of 10 children. I'm very lucky. Went to college. I put myself through college. I'm one of the first. I think I'm the first boy to graduate college in my family. My dad was a World War II guy. Quit high school during World War II. I grew up right outside of Boston in Davis Square, Somerville, which is a very hip happening place right now. Very close to Harvard and Tufts. I used to work in the Somerville school system with behavior problem kids. Life happens, change happens in an instant, and I end up becoming the victim of a violent crime with, an habitual offender, someone I've never spoken to before. And
so tell us a little bit about the day of the incidents. What exactly caused the brain injury?
I was playing in a basketball. I was 32, and this is right about 20 years ago. I've come up on the 19th year, I think. I was 32, and I was playing in a basketball league, a league that I played in for years. And we were beating this team, and we ended up winning by like 15 points. But during the game, there was an incident where a member on the other team got a cut over their eye. And it turns out that there was a bunch of habitual offenders on the team. And it escalated after the game. It was the night before the All-Star game at Fenway Park back in 1999, July 12th. And I saw one of my friends who's kind of a hothead going to get into a skirmish after the game with this guy. And I went over and I'm like, hey, the game's over. And while that happened, a kid pushed my friend, and there was a kid standing behind me who ended up going to jail. And he punched me, and I fell down, hit my head, and started bleeding out of my ear. And the next thing you know, the next year was kind of foggy,
So yeah, what's so interesting about that incident, I remember you describing it vividly, that you were being a good Samaritan. You literally went to help out and just diffuse the tension that was there, right?
Yeah, if you tend to believe me, I was certified by the state of Massachusetts in nonviolent crisis prevention, intervention. So I used to break up fights all day long in the school system, work with behavioral problem kids, and we did restraints. And so I never really, said why this happened to me, because I figured, bad stuff happens, and, I was a good Samaritan. So I'm very comfortable with my actions that night. So despite that, it left me with a hearing problem, a big dent in my head, and surgeries and years of therapy later. I've always been very comfortable. Like, not, I was in the right place at the right time. So I moved past anything like that. So I'm very happy and lucky about that.
That's very interesting and kind of really scary. So tell us what happened. So you fell to the ground, hit your head, you noticed, or people must have noticed. So you lost consciousness. Were you taken to the hospital? What was the course of immediate treatment look like?
I fell, and I don't recall anything at that point, but pieced together. And fortunately, there was one of my brother's friends was there, and he's a captain. He was a captain on the Cambridge Fire Department, and they called it. He had a cell phone, and he called an ambulance, and people came down, and they decided. He said, it's funny. He said, we're going to take him to Mount Auburn, and he said, no, take him. He's bleeding. He's got a head injury. Take him to Mass General. And that was my first stroke of luck right there, because there was a hospital closer, but Mass General, it turns out, is ranked like number 2 in the world for head injuries. So we went there. So probably within an hour, I was starting to receive, treatment at Mass General. I think they probably did the first MRI. And then, so this is all sort of stuff that I pieced together and other people have told me. And, so my first recollection after it happened is a woman holding me and pulling me out of MRI where I was sick and vomiting. And that's my first recollection of anything, because everything else is sort of fuzzy and sort of blends into but then there's moments of clarity that were great. And I remember one of my second ones, my mother and my wife showed up, and I remember saying, they were in the room, they were upset. I could tell that they were upset. And I was like, oh, this is, I go up, at least my 2 favorite women are here. And then the nurse walked in, and I said, oh, my 3 favorite women. So I I was playful. I was aware, and I was able to hold a conversation, but it just all blends together. There are great moments of clarity, but there's a lot of things I've pieced together.
Yeah, and a lot of times, I think, as you mentioned, if you lose consciousness, then people develop amnesia, leading up to the event or right after the event. A lot of people lose memory of that. So how severe were you diagnosed? How severe was your traumatic brain injury? And how long did you stay in the hospital? Walk us through the symptoms that you experienced after you started getting better.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. So one of the things is I didn't think there was anything wrong. I'm like, oh, because I remember them saying, oh, you're going to have brain surgery. And I'm like, brain surgery? I don't need brain surgery. You need brain surgery. I don't need brain. I was very impulsive. The stories that I called my boss at work and was joking, and I don't remember doing this. So I was doing a lot of things that were inappropriate, I think. I was sort of mischievous, and friends would come to visit me, and they were laughing, and I was joking, but I didn't gather why I was the way I was. It was like I had a little bit drunk and sort of mischievous and playful, but it was constant. I remember my sister, who's a nurse, saying to my wife, said, he's different, right away. I didn't recognize. I was having fun in a way. I was sick, but I was also couldn't believe what had happened to me, and never really never thought there was anything wrong with me. I don't need brain surgery. Well, why would I need brain surgery? It's just sort of denial and not even the ability to understand. So like one of the first times I can recall was in the hospital. A woman came by to do some testing. She had me write a checkbook, I think, or doing some math. And I remember being confused about it and just sort of slightly know that I should be able to do this. Then they waited for the swelling to go down. I had surgery probably a week after I went into the hospital at Mass General, and then I was released 2 weeks later. I was taken home to my mother's house, and I remember being excited about going home. I just want to be in the hospital, and they shaved my head, and I remember the trip. I got sick on the way home, and I was just so excited to be finally home. And there was all sorts of people. Like I said, I have a big family, all my nieces and nephews, and everyone was there. And I laid on the couch, and I started my rehab probably a couple of weeks later. And that was when I calmed down a little bit. I don't think I was so impulsive and so, I don't use the word inappropriate, so childlike, like a teenager, like a silly teenager. I think one of the very first steps, and I think I mentioned this before, is Dr. Kevin Dominguez at my mass rehab. We used to go there every day. They would drop me off every day. Physical, speech, occupational therapy. And I think he's a neuropsychologist, a neuropsychiatrist. I'm not sure. But I remember vividly that he gave me a puzzle to do. And it was like you see like a little kid doing a puzzle. It's like 12 pieces of a house. There's the windows and the door and these big pieces on like a 8.5 by 14 cardboard thing. And he took them all out and said, okay, put them back together. And I was looking at him incredulous. I was like, I know how to put together a puzzle. This is stupid. This is ridiculous. Why, this is easy. And then when the time came to put the pieces of the puzzle back together, I couldn't do it. And it was frustrating. And I started to be like, wait a second, this is easy. I'm 100% positive that I should be able to do this. And for some reason, inexplicably, I can't do this. And I was holding things. I was like trying to put a round peg in a square hole, I just couldn't grasp why they weren't going in, why it wasn't as easy as I knew it to be. And I don't remember what he said, but I just remember laughing. And then I literally fell to the floor and just started laughing because I was like, wait a second, I looked underneath the puzzle. I'm like looking, it was like a trick, like a trap door. And I knew that I should be able to do it. And it struck me as absolutely hysterical, but also, wow, this is a head injury, like this is something wrong with me. All these people aren't wrong, So that was the very first time. And I still see his face looking down at me as I'm laying on the floor laughing uncontrollably, So, like a sense of humor was very, it's explaining the inexplicable. One day you know how to do math, and the next day you don't know how to do math. One day you do, that I'm putting on my clothes, a bathing suit. A bathing suit was like trying to figure out a math equation, with a liner and everything. I couldn't figure out how to put it on. I was putting it on inside out, my clothes inside out, all these little things that I knew I should be able to do and couldn't, and it was like frustrating, but it was also challenging. And then at the mass rehab, the first community, we had like a group session, and in there was probably about 10 people. And I was so much better off than everyone else. There were some people that were head injuries from car accidents. I think there was out of the 10 people that I remember, probably 8 of them were car accidents. One was like a aneurysm, and myself. And I was so much, they were like they couldn't do anything. Things were coming back to me, things were coming back. And I remember one of the first tests, part of the neurological studies that they do, was Dr. Mel Glenn. And he asked me, he goes, well, we're going to ask you a question. He goes, but before this meeting's over, at the end of this meeting, I want you to say 3 things: Cincinnati, airport, and there was a third thing. And I'm like, okay. And so I was going to get it. It was like a challenge. Like they're trying to trick me. They're asking me these questions. I'm going to get all these questions right. And so we went through the whole interview, and my therapy session ended. And I got all the way back to my house in Somerville, and it just dawned on me that I forgot to say those 3 words: Cincinnati, airport, and something else. And I called them back up and said, Cincinnati, airport. And I don't know what the third one is. And to this day, those are the 3 words. Well, those are 2 of the 3 words. I don't know what the third word is, but I still remember 20 years later, Cincinnati, airport, and whatever else. Like, hey, I know it's late, but I remembered it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes, of course.
So there was another thing, and I'm putting this out. And so in the group, the day people, I don't want to say established as a leader, but I was very vocal. I'm like, come on, guys, we can do this. I was very team oriented. Let's go, guys. Let's go. I can help you. And I remember one of the counselors, there was a guy having a hard time, and I was trying to cheer him up. And I remember the guy telling me, no, Paul, let him be, So I think I was forceful, and I think I was like, let's go, we can do this, but not aware that it was his time, his moment, and I was probably being imposing, but not. So missing out on that social cue, kind of. So I felt like I was the guy, and then I would help, and we would laugh, and we would joke, we would get stuff done, and they would give me all these things, and things were coming back to me. And then I remember another vivid test of this friend, Tommy Glenn. He came with about like 5 guys came to see me, good friends that I've known growing up. And he looked at me, and I knew all of them, like, hey. And I looked at that kid, and for the life of me, I couldn't remember his name. And it was like, I know this guy. He's a friend of mine. And I couldn't do it. And I was going through the stuff, and it was, as my friends were talking to me and everything, I just remember being like, I knew that I should know him. what's his name? What is his name? And he's a good friend. And then later on, when I found out his name, it was like another file opened up. I'm like, oh yeah, Tommy. And then I remembered stuff that we'd gone down the Cape, and I remembered stuff, like things started coming back, like vividly almost, you know?
Paul, sounds like you were going through this rehabilitation, and there was certainly a lot of things were becoming clear to you regarding what your challenges were. So that rehabilitation process did help, right?
It helped incredibly. And it did. What really helped me was realize there was a problem. And, for example, we did this home study. They had to release me back into, the neighborhood and show I was a contributing member, I guess. I could do things. And I was like, I know how to. They came to my house and said, okay, Paul, we want you to make a grilled cheese sandwich. And I was like frustrated and like irritated. I'm like, this is really silly. I've been making grilled cheese sandwiches since I was a little kid, and so I made a sandwich, and I was like, remember sort of mocking them a little bit, saying, come on, this is silly. Let's move on to something else. And they said, okay, Paul, nope, let's stick with it and take it out. And so what I did was I reached in and burned my hand. I tried to grab it with my bare hand. And I was like, whoa, that's sort of the impulse. Don't grab a spatula, just grab the grilled cheese sandwich. I wouldn't have done that before. I burnt my hand and I was like, whoa. And then there was like the other things I would think about crossing the street, and I would just like, okay, I just start walking up the traffic, and you don't do that. You look both ways. You make sure you have to judge, you have to assess everything, and you go. So sort of these routine tasks became non-routine.
So you're describing a lot of symptoms that are very interesting. If a person is not paying attention, they can be overlooked, or they may not get the right kind of attention. Couple of things that strike me that I would love to share with our listeners, that you definitely were suffering from disinhibition, and that disinhibition is just, as you mentioned, a couple of words. One is kind of having a slight immature presentation, just childlike, goofy teenager kind of attitude and responses to what's happening around you. Second thing you mentioned was this jokingly kind of taking everything lightly or making light of everything, appearing to be this funny guy, and impulsivity, jumping into things without thinking too much. And the last thing that struck me also that I often is a symptom is the denial, like truly not understanding the deep scope of your difficulties, and or once you get into those difficult situations, always having a dismissive attitude. And it's a double-edged sword when people are going through rehabilitation, that rehabilitation in the beginning stages simply adds value in improving people's awareness. And until the awareness improves, you really can't improve skills. So it sounds like your initial rehabilitation went towards that, didn't it?
You're right. It became, I had confidence. I was never really accepting that things were a challenge. And so I had all this confidence to do these simple tasks. And then I wasn't getting them done, and time was being wasted. And I would, and so I happened to, maybe this is where I can transition how I found you. Is I remember I got my license back, and I was driving, and I remember driving up I was going to my brother's house for a party. It was Sunday afternoon. We were going to watch a football game or something. And on the way, I started thinking about my other brother who lived 20 miles in the opposite direction. And I forgot why I was going and just drove to my other brother's house. And I got out and was like, all right, why is no one here? And I was like, oh yeah, we supposed football. So I had to get in the car and drive 20 miles the other way, and I can laugh about it. But once it came back, it was like, okay, all right, next step, be more cautious, write things down, all these sort of simple tasks. Like Kevin Dominguez said, just get organized, try to be organized. And I kept a journal. I started writing things down every day and then looking at it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's when that happened. That's when that happened. And then so I went for a checkup probably.
And you would have never done that before, right, Paul, before your head injury?
No.
You wouldn't have been that guy who went in the wrong direction or kind of completely lost track of what you were doing?
No, I definitely would have done that. That's the specific result of a head. I wouldn't have done those things. I wouldn't have put my hand in a hot frying pan. I wouldn't have been in a
exactly.
flashing. I would have been flashing my nurse at the hospital. I wouldn't be saying medication time, trying to have her sing. So I would take my medicine. Like there was a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was a great movie, and it's like I remember saying medication time, medicating. I would try to get the nurse to play with me and sort of be mischievous and say, okay, I'm not going to take my medicine until you say medication time. But not grasping, but looking back on it, I was just in the moment. And looking back on it, I wasn't grasping the seriousness of it. I wasn't grasping the thing. I was just me. That's the only me I knew at the time. And I have the ability to look back, and I think I'm putting it in perspective, and it got better. Things got better. And then a year later, I was still putting clothes on inside out, still doing all these different things that were very frustrating. And I remember I went back for a checkup, and the two doctors I went to see, I told them, and I'm not going to say they didn't seem interested, but they were like, well, we're just really here to look at your scars and go over some, we're like, what you're talking about is sort of an injury to the brain. And he said, and I'll never forget this. He said, there's a program here at Mass Journal the woman had started, Steps to Success for High Functioning People. I don't think he said the word high functioning, but he said, I'll try to get her name and maybe you could call her. And then I got it, and I still felt lost. And I think tendencies from other people, because your family, this happens to you. So you get out of the hospital, you go and you move on. And I don't think people sort of assessed, I didn't forget about these things. I wasn't putting my clothes on inside out because I was sad and emotional. I didn't do these things because I was an emotional
depressed or you're anxious. That was not the reason why you were forgetting which way is the right way to put the clothes. Yeah, of course.
The anxiety came from the frustration of putting together, of doing these simple things, walking around for an hour looking for my keys and they're in my hand. And those things happen, but physically, having to have my wife sit there, because I remember going to we're going to get in a hot tub and say, honey, I can't put on my bathing suit because it was sort of inside out and the lining was there and just had 4 layers of difficulty. And she got it and was like, okay, put your leg in here, So that was the anxiety came from knowing that I was a 33-year-old man who was healthy and wasn't able to do those things that had just been, you didn't even take for granted. You didn't even thought about them. So then I met you and I was sort of trying to express to you, these are things that I'm doing. And I think you had me do some tests and then asked me to come to your program. And
yes, so this is when I saw you, it was very interesting. If you don't mind, if you can share what I noticed. I think it was fascinating to me that you presented with a very interesting profile, if I may say so. You were highly motivated to make a change in your life, and you were highly oblivious to the challenges that you were facing. And it's always an interesting combination, isn't it? Because you are motivated, but you just don't know. So it's like somebody who's locked in a room, and they're highly motivated to get out, but they're banging on the wall. They just don't know the door. And they're not even, opening the door, or, they don't even know the door difference between the door and the wall and the windows kind of thing. So that was one thing that was quite apparent. And second thing was your social skills. You were way off in terms of reading this room, reading the situation, reading people's facial expressions, understanding the meaning behind words or understanding colloquialisms, things like that. You also were excessively, what we call in our field, verbose. You talked a lot, talked too much. You gave long-winded explanations for things that required one word or single sentence answers. You also you found it hard to come to the point. You would take a very long route to get to the answer. Another interesting thing that I thought was coming in your way of success is just solutions were not coming to you right away. They were primarily, I think, because you didn't have the best understanding of the problem. So your solutions were not matching the problem, so to speak. But it wasn't a deficit or difficulty or lack of intelligence. You now lost the ability to problem solve. I think, but you must have been a really good, as you mentioned, your prior job and the way you were the youngest of 10. So you really, you were a charmer, you always you knew how your way with people. So that probably was not something you were familiar with, to not get to the solution when you were so good with thinking about other people and thinking about things. So those are the kinds of things that were really striking when you and I met first.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. The wanting to solve a problem, but not knowing how to go about solving it, being in uncharted territory. But when you say highly motivated, all I cared about was getting better. That's all I cared about. And to get a second chance to go to your program, and I remember walking those 6 people, I think 5 or 6 patients.
Yes.
There was I think there was a couple of tough students there. So it was, it's probably 9 people in the room. And I remember I remember sort of coming to the conclusion, like, there's no place, I need to make the most of this. If I'm going to get better, there are all these people that are looking to help me. I've just been given another chance to go through and sort of explain, take off another layer of the problems that I was having, than get organized. Well, it's very simple, to say, all these different things that they taught me at the first one. We had all these people in different stages of recovery. And I was the best. I was I was like sort of the king of that crowd. I was the most fortunate, and I'm like, I remember sitting there saying, oh my God, I'm so thankful I'm not him. and then
Yes.
we got your program. And I remember, there was, the woman that had a couple of books published, a guy, the CEO, all these people. And I remember thinking, oh man, I'm glad I'm not them, And so I was very comfortable with me. Like, I knew that I didn't want to have, we still had some of the same problems, but I was just like, no, I just want to get better. And there were times that we learned a lot about the brain and different things. And I remember being lost in some of the conversations, but I kept, I was like, okay, try to stay focused, go over. And it was just, some of it was fragmented, I think. And I couldn't grasp my head around what I was trying to get involved in. And we learned about, routine tasks, your executive function, executive region, your right frontal lobe. Oh, so shit, I just thought about this one thing. And part of the things that drove me was, I remember reading, somehow I got the report of the mass community rehab, and I had not been a great student. Catholic schools, I think my parents I had older brothers and teenagers during the Vietnam era, and there was drugs and different things. I think I just sort of flew under the radar. But I remember reading one of the results of the test, and it said, like your IQ testing. And I'd never done any of that. I thought that I felt I lacked confidence. I didn't get good grades, so I didn't think I was smart. And I looked, and I remember seeing the word, it said IQ. And it had the number, and it said in the superior range. And I thought the word superior, I'm like, I just had brain trade. How could I be superior, And I was not, then I looked at in the sentence, it said the other part was, the communication, that was the communication verbal part. And so I was very, like you said, a charmer and had the ability to speak and interact. People, I used to bartend, I used to work behavior problem kids. So I had ability to multitask, I think. And then I read the performance part, and I was like 85. And there's usually, how I read it to mean was there's 5 points difference between the two sort of portions of the IQ testing. And in my instance, it said dramatic because there is now 36 points difference. And that is indicative of a right frontal lobe brain injury. At that point, I had probably had a bunch of MRIs. And I remember thinking, oh my God, all this time, I never thought superior. I still don't think the word superior today, but it was like they were saying I was smart. And so it made me feel like I should have had done more. Had I known that before, I would have had more confidence, I think. And I felt cheated that I didn't know that. But I cheated myself. I didn't have a great foundation of study habits and other things. So there was a lot of relearning, a lot of rebuilding, re-educating myself about everything. So I tried to get good foundation. I tried to get good study habit. I would read a book. I would read it and highlight it in yellow. Then I would read is this about a head injury? I was so fascinated about it. Then I would read again and I would highlight the parts that I thought were important in green. And then I would do it again. And I thought it would be in orange. And I remember seeing the book after it had 3 different things. And, orange was the last try, like what was really important. And trying to read through the ability to have retention. I don't think I was retaining most of it, but then I would go back and look at whatever I thought of something important, I would highlight it. And, so I think I worked, well, I'm not going to say I worked. I just wanted to get better. That's all.
You worked really hard. And so quickly, if I can circle back to some of the things that we worked on, I think you were talking about the Steps to Success program. This program was designed for academic and professional reentry for people who had a very high functioning life prior to their injury. And their goal was to return to that level of engagement with the world. And their brain injury was such that they were walking and talking fine, but they were not able to pull all the moving parts of their life together. And so, as you mentioned, we had a successful author, we had a psychologist, we had a business contractor. So there were lots of these amazingly accomplished people, you yourself, successful prior to the injury. And going back to that level of optimal function was not really even a viable option. Or many people had made an attempt, but they had had several setbacks. Either their marriages were under duress, or the job had kind of given them warning that they're not doing the best job possible. And there were students that who had not complete. There were PhD students and who had to take a sabbatical. So things like that. And you're describing some of the components beautifully, that the program was designed to have three components. One was the educational component. So it wasn't just informing people about the effects of brain injury, but we really went into the depth of what does the brain look like? What's the function of the brain? How does the brain work? What are the inner mechanics of the brain? And how does it serve you in managing self? And then the second part was exercise-based training. We did a lot of training where we gave opportunities to patients to exercise those abilities, that we don't isolate them and then don't practice them. And then lastly, we did a lot of training of compensatory strategies. And so a few things that if we can revisit that you were mentioning, tell us a little bit about your emotional state in all this. Tell us, how did you change? One of the things that you kind of alluded, we often see because of such kind of concussion or brain injury, is called emotional lability, that people laugh much more readily or inappropriately, or people cry. They become they become very vulnerable to anything in their surroundings, that their crying and laughing responses are much more readily accessed, and that may be even inappropriate. Second thing is also kind of not really reading social emotional relationships, and particularly in intimate situations, and that can pose a lot of problem for people. And lastly, I think often people do experience a lot more, depression, or as you mentioned, anxiety, because of the unknown, or not really processing all the things that are happening to you without your consent. Like, you don't want your life to spiral down, and it is right in front of your eyes, but you're not in a coma, or you're not in the hospital anymore. So can you tell us a little bit about your emotional state through all this journey?
That's a really good question. Emotionally, I think I was clueless at the time. Looking back, I've come to realize this. It didn't just happen to me, it happened to my entire family. And I remember being just probably irritable to those close. My wife didn't deserve any of this,
How long were you married before when the accident happened?
4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
And
so I was not easy. I lived at home for a little bit with my mom. Then we got back together, and I was probably overbearing. And so emotionally, I felt like I had to do more. I just wanted to do more. Like, I had to get up. Plus, there was the whole court thing that I went through, and that was, being the victim of violent crime. It's about deception. It's about, I just wanted to get better. I had to deal with some stuff that I shouldn't have had to deal with, and I remember that. This is really funny. The kid that was an epitome, the man, right? I was supposed to go to trial, and I told them I wasn't going, and they said, "What? What do you mean?" And I said, "Nope. I'm going to this thing at Mass General. It's more important to me. All I care about better. I don't care what happens to that kid. All I care about is getting better." And the woman and one of the district attorneys said, "Okay, well, we're going to wait until after you go to this program. After your program is when I had to still have to deal with some court issues, So,
yeah.
So there's a whole, whatever those 5 stages: anger, denial, acceptance. I sort of dealt with it, and I probably didn't. There was a lot of pride in my family. I wanted to get better because all these people were helping me. I didn't want to be taken care of. I didn't want, and laughing and joking, it's probably a defense mechanism. And, I masked probably some of my inner feelings, when I was alone. I tried to write stuff, but emotionally, I was a basket case. I was completely out of it. And then I would probably take it out to people. My wife didn't deserve that. My mother, some of my friends, it became easier for me. This is really interesting. It became easier to me to meet and form relationships with other people because they had no preconceived notions of me before. Don't compare Paul to Paul's, and I think there was sadness in a lot of people's eyes, and I didn't want that. I don't have time for this. I don't care about you. I have a funny story. My cousin who's so loyal, and I had to go back for surgery on my ear, second time at Mass Eye and Ear, and he showed up. He's so loyal. He showed up on the morning I was supposed to have surgery, and he was upset. He's like, "This sucks. This is awful. I can't believe this is happening to you." And I looked at my wife and I'm like, "Good luck to you, honey. I'm going to have surgery. At least I can get away from him." So his heart was in the right place, but I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want that. I just wanted to get better.
Yeah. So tell us about your relationship with your wife. In what sense did she see the change, and what kind of made it so hard for her and you as you were going through this journey?
That's she stuck by me, but I wasn't ready for her to stick by me. I was angry about being a victim of a crime. I was angry going through a court system. I was angry that I couldn't put together a puzzle. I was angry that I have tinnitus in my ear, that was a constant
ringing in the ear.
In the ear, that I'm like, okay, I was angry about that. I was dealing with the frustration of that. And it's weird. I didn't have to worry about my reactions. Then you're in a relationship and you're inappropriate. So you say something and you had to worry about her reactions to my reaction. So we separated for a while and, we got back together, and she still talks about, she was more angry. Like I never really said, I never said, why did this happen to me? It doesn't matter. Like I accepted it right away. So the relationship is difficult. And Ellen, she deserved better. Some of my friends deserved better. And in a lot of ways, it was easy. It's easier when it happens to you than to my sister, or had it happen to her. Like it was easier that it happened to me than someone else that I loved. And my problem is I was loved by so many people. It just became like I was a magnifying glass on me everywhere I went. So there was a lot of what should I do to get back to make them feel better.
And you took on a lot of burden of comforting them as you were going through this journey yourself, which probably was unreasonable, Paul. It was your time to heal, but probably you didn't feel most comfortable. So many people expressing their care and love, which you thought was causing them inconvenience. So yeah, I could see you were so torn up about those kinds of emotional issues, and you had a style of, keeping it down. It took a lot out of you during those days. I could see it.
Yeah, so there's something happened. So with like the court system, I went through and I ended up giving a victim impact speech, and I remember saying, I'm going to do more with my damaged brain than most people will do with their normal brain, and I just it became this challenge of doing more and getting back to normal, so I probably, so there's a lot of scarring, but I ran a marathon. I have a seat named, and I'm not saying this because I want recognition. Like these are all these things that became easy. Helping people became easy. My mother would bring in people, I would come home at night and there'd be strangers. She would just take care of people, so helping people was really easy. And it was important to me that I continue to help people because I incurred a brain injury for helping people. So I was like, I'm going to help more people. I'm just going to do more. And now that I got a job, you helped me when I was switching from Simmons College to Harvard. The support system was so much better at Harvard. And I remember we wrote down the pros and cons and
yeah.
I was so scared to change something. And I got in here and it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, and it turned out to be such a great match for who you are as a person. You've gotten a chance to be most effective in the environment that nurtured you and took care of you. And then you could give all of you to them.
And so now it's been going on. This is 20 years later. I've had Rhodes Scholars work for me. I deal directly with the students. Some of my tools are literally the brightest, and I always look for kids that need money, and not everyone's loaded at Harvard. And, it became, for instance, it became healing in so many ways. I had a girl, one of the first girls that worked for me, she was at Harvard. And when I was a little kid, I grew up only a few miles away, and I thought, everyone that goes to Harvard is rich and they've got everything. And I would love to be them. And I would never want to be someone else. I remember this girl, she started working, she was the nicest girl. And it turns out that I found out that her mother was murdered by her father. And I'm thinking, she made it to Harvard. And there's all these people have their own struggles, and I never had as much confidence until I started working at Harvard. I started getting people, simple tasks. I do facility stuff and I get, I solve problems and I do budgeting and I plan, and it's sort of the calendar events. Everything happens on a sort of everything that happens in July happens the next July, pretty much. You deal with the wrinkles. And so I have all these smart people to help me. And I'm very, people have told me a lot of good things, but it's really because look at the people that I have working for me. So you're right. It caters to my skill set. I can joke, I can laugh. I used to coach young kids, and these kids, they do everything for me, and they thank me. There's a little bit of Tom Sawyer. I get them to do everything I want them to get done, and then thank me for helping me, for letting me help them. And everyone's like, "Oh, Paul, you're so good." I'm like, I stay out of the. It doesn't take a genius to stay out of the way and let something good happen sometimes. So.
Well, as we come to the end of the conversation, Paul, tell us a little bit about what kind of effects, if any, you notice that take you back to the traumatic brain injury, and how do you live your life successfully now? Do you need to use tricks and strategies, or have you all the work that you do? The time you took to do all the work on yourself has paid off, obviously, and certainly has made you richer for it. How does that on a daily basis show up?
On a daily basis, well, so you talked a little while. You started to mention about compensating strategies, and I remember I had a job coach, and I would, we learned about sights and smells and touch and feel, and I would go to meetings at Harvard, and the first thing I would do, I'd get there early, and I'd write, just put a big circle around who was around the table, and I'd close my eyes if they smelled. If it was coffee, I would sort of replay the day, and I would use different senses and approaches to replay the day. Like I would rewind the day. Okay, what happened? Oh yeah, that's right. And then so and so sneezed, and then they talked about this, and then it got to the point where I was replaying important meetings, and I was remembering things were popping up in the meeting, and then I would write. Obviously, the writing down things that will happen, not promising. I remember not promising when I was new to a job.
Yes.
Didn't commit, but so yeah. So one thing's. Here I am afflicted with a memory disorder, and everyone says, "Paul, you have an incredible memory." And one of the things I do is there'll be people that come into my room, and I'll say, he's from Kansas City. She's from Michigan. Michigan meet Kansas City. So it's like a mnemonic starting point that I have all these where everyone's from. It's like a starting point where they're from. I'll forget their name, but I remember where they're from, and then I remember they told me they're the youngest of 4 kids, and they worked at this and they did this, and so I do a lot of introduction. That's how I do things. I have my sort of base strategy, what I get through, write things down. There's definitely challenges that pop up. I think I wrote to you the other day. I met someone about a year ago, and I saw her the other night with one of my friends. She's now starting to date with my friends, and I forgot where I remembered her from. And then once it came back to me, she's at the golf tournament. She was a teacher working at this golf tournament, a charity golf tournament that we've done. And all of a sudden, it just opened up all the floodgate of all these things. Oh yeah, that's right. You're the mother. You live with. You teach special ed. You work at Cambridge. And it just sort of, it was like a block. And it was like all these things came out that I was surprised at because I had no recollection. And here I am a year later. It just showed up vividly in my head. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, it's been such a joy talking with you and listening to your story and your honesty and your heartwarming tale of this arduous journey that you took on, and so many people joined you and were so vested in you. That was the best part for me, all the years that we worked together, to see the support you have. Not a lot of people bring that support or are, lucky to have that. And the second thing that I would love to kind of just let you hear it from me one more time is your humility. Always you came from such a humble place and always so generous in spirit to give all you had to others was infectious. Even in the group that we ran, you were always the cheerleader, willing to go above and beyond. And I'm so happy that you are at Harvard with students, because that's the best place for your generosity to shine. So congratulations for all that you do. And thank you for coming on the show and being so generous here as well.
Oh, can I mention one thing?
Yes, please.
So I wanted to say something before and after, and this is, so years ago, I was the best man at my brother's wedding, right? And I gave this sort of horrible speech. I was deathly afraid of speaking in front of someone, in front of a crowd. And now I speak in front of kids, and I've given people say, "Oh, you're such an incredible," it's like, you're a good public speaker. And the point I'm trying to make is, once you don't care, you can accomplish all these things, like sort of social thing. I didn't care what people thought. I don't care what people think of me now. It's like, it's about, I'm saying that there's a difference in that person. It's a watershed moment, kind of, the head injury, and out of it came a lot of good things despite the bad things. So I appreciate your comments, and I'm willing to help hopefully someone. I would tell people that had a head injury, embrace it and just do what you can and get better and try, and you can find incredible joy even though we all a lot of scarring.
Well, thank you again, Paul, and enjoy your day with your beautiful Grace. And please give her my best wishes on her birthday.
Well.
Thank you for listening to Full PreFrontal, exposing the mysteries of executive functions. To contact our host, Sucheta Kamath, and learn more about her work on improving executive functions, visit her website at cerebralmatters.com. That's cerebralmatters.com. Tune in next week for the next informative episode of Full PreFrontal.